Hey guys, bachphotography here, and today we are looking at a portrait session I did with Jasmyn Sarah. I'll leave a link to her Instagram in the description if you're interested in seeing more of her work. And if you're new here, please click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you can keep up with all the latest videos that I put out. So I'm going to leave some raw files from this photo shoot in the description in the Dropbox link, just in case you want to edit along or just have a play with the files yourself. So in this video we're going to look at this photo in particular, and we're going to look at all the equipment that I used to take this photo. We're going to go into the camera settings and look at that as well, and then we're going to go into the lighting techniques that we used, and then finally we're going to jump into Photoshop and go through the editing that we did on this photo. So the equipment I used for this photo was a Canon 5D Mark IV with a Sigma 85 1.4 art lens, and there's a link in the description to all of this equipment as well. The settings in the camera were an aperture of f1.4, a shutter speed of 1/1600th of a second, and an ISO of 200. So the reason I used an aperture of f1.4 is to really blow out the background and draw focus to the subject of this photo, which is Jasmyn. I shot at a shutter speed of 1/1600th of a second because it was a really bright day outside, so I really had to stop down the shutter speed just so I could get a nice exposure in the image. And I shot at an ISO of 200 because that is the native ISO of the Canon camera I was using, which meant I got the best clean signal to my sensor, which meant that I could have the most dynamic image possible. So let's talk about lighting for a second. I shot with Jasmyn at 3 o'clock, and where we are at the moment it goes dark about 5 o'clock, and that meant that the sun was really nice and low in the sky, and basically what that means is that there's not going to be any really harsh highlights and shadows. Also, we were really lucky to have clouds in the sky which acted like a really big softbox on our light source. So here are a few more images from the day, and then we'll go into Photoshop and start looking at the editing on this image. Okay, so we're in Camera Raw here, which is a plugin of Photoshop, and we're just going to boost the clarity of the entire image just to make Jasmyn pop from the background a little bit more. The next thing we're going to do is just drop the shadows a little bit, add some contrast, and drop the blacks. And basically the reason for that is because I shot in RAW, often the shadows aren't as deep and dense as they could be, just because the RAW files are giving you as much flexibility as possible by keeping the contrast low in the image. So the next thing we're going to do is just get the paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to mask all of the skin on her face, which I want to be smoother. So I'm just dropping the exposure, the shadows and the blacks just so I can use this brush as a masking tool, just so I can get all of the parts of her skin which I'd want to make smoother later on. And I'm making sure not to go over any contrasting lines that I want to keep sharp, such as her eyebrows, parts of her nose and lips and things like that. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to drop the clarity so that her skin smooths out a little bit, and basically what dropping the clarity does is just smooths out the skin, gets rid of any contrasting lines. Next thing we're doing here is just adding a little bit more clarity and exposure to the eyes, just to make them really pop out of the image. Now, you've got to be really careful with that, just because if you go too much, too bright, you can give your model laser beam eyes. So what we're doing here is just adding a little bit more darkness to her lips and her eyebrows. Next step, we're going to drop the exposure, shadows and blacks again, just so we can use the paintbrush as a masking tool to mask all of her hair, so we can make it a little bit brighter in post-production. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to add some saturation and just change the color balance of her hair very slightly into a more yellow and purple color, just to make her hair look a little bit more orange and stand out a little bit more. Alright, I think that's pretty much everything in Camera Raw. One last thing we'll do is just add a little bit of clarity to her clothing, just to make it a little bit more interesting and to pop out a little bit more. Because her whole body was in focus, adding a little bit more clarity to her body just makes it stand out a little bit more. So one final thing we're doing here is just going to make a mask of the entire background, and then once we've done that, we're just going to add a little bit more warmth to the image. Because it was an overcast day, the background is a little bit colder than I like, so we're just going to get a whole mask of the background and make it a little bit more yellow, just so the image looks a little bit more warm. Okay, so that's everything in Camera Raw. Now let's jump into native Photoshop and finish off this edit. So the first thing we'll do in Photoshop is just get rid of any blemishes that we can see on her skin. Jasmyn's skin was actually really good, so there isn't much work to do here, just a little bits and pieces here and there. So last thing to do is just make Jasmyn's hair a little bit more full and thick. Just makes the entire image look a little bit more dramatic. And that's everything. I really hope you liked this video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did. And remember, all of the images from the shoot can be found in the description, along with all of the camera equipment used for these photos. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.